All right. Welcome. Welcome to this week's Everyday Inclusion Live. Just like the start of a new month where things happen, we had all kinds of tech issues, but Trisha and I persevered.
We did. We're
And here we
here.
are. I'm Mo. I'm a white woman, red hair, wearing some semi-cat eye glasses. My bookshelf with books and some of my favorite things is behind me. I am the founder of Moxie and Everyday Inclusion. We host this series so we can all learn from each other. Today is the first day of Black History Month. I hope everybody has amazing things planned to learn, to grow, and to celebrate. I think the celebration of Black excellence, I hope, is centered for everybody. And we're doing our fair share of that at Moxie. Two things. In the Everyday Inclusion app, we have our monthly badge challenge, all kinds of cool first and facts and bios and our inclusion interviews. And then as a team, we are sharing what some of our favorite resources are, whether it's books, podcasts, movies, Substacks, whatever, so that we can all share and learn from some of our favorite resources together. And I am excited today to be talking with Trisha. So Trisha and I met, I don't know, just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And I immediately wanted to have you on, Trisha, to talk about Latina executive leadership and Latina leadership. So please introduce yourself, and then we're going to jump in.
Thank you. Thanks, Mo, for having me. And thanks for the work that you do in the world. It's so important.
Thank
And
you.
we need all of us to do this work. So thank you. So do you want me to start telling
Well,
my
you know
story?
what? Let's
Tell
do
me where to
this.
start.
The reason I'm having you on, and I think it's going to serve as a great introduction, is I would love for you to tell us your story
Mm-hmm.
as a Latina woman and how you got to be to where you are today.
Oh, yeah. So it's a good story. I'll start quickly with the professional, but the more interesting part of my story is my personal story. But professionally, I'm a corporate lawyer. I've been working in Silicon Valley 25 years. Started my career in a large national law firm in Silicon Valley, back in the late 90s and the dot-com boom and all the things. Got incredible experience, worked on a ton of deals, and then spent most of my career working with startup companies, mid to late stage companies, and large global multinational corporations. My last role was as general counsel and head of DEI at a company called Looker, which was a data analytics company, which we sold to Google in 2020 for 2.6 billion. So fantastic exit, amazing company. Um, and since there, I decided to take a pivot, and now I serve on a corporate board doing some nonprofit work, and wrote this book. But on the personal
Yeah, so
side,
I would
yeah,
love for you to, if like,
yeah,
let's have the shameless plug for the book, and
sure, yes.
y'all, we will put the link so that you can order your copies and get Trisha's book.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, I always kind of gloss over. I mean, the book was a huge amount of work. It's called Embrace the Power of You, Owning Your Identity at Work. And it chronicles my journey, which I'll share a bit now, as a first generation Latina in corporate America, and hiding and downplaying my identity because I thought that's the only way I was going to make it. I didn't see anyone that looked like me. I didn't have any network, and I didn't know how to survive otherwise. So realized that in order to fit in, really, belonging begins with self-acceptance. And it talks about my journey, steps, and strategies to get on the other side to really showing up authentically in the workplace.
Which is
And so,
that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So
yes.
tell us your personal story.
Yes. So my personal story. I'm a first generation Latina. My mother was from El Salvador and my father was from Ecuador. They met in Los Angeles. That's where I was born. Spanish was my first language. And we lived in LA until around when I was around 5 years old. And my parents, like many Latino immigrants, came to this country to achieve the American dream. and education is a very strong foundation for them. And so they decided to move us out of the city to provide us some better opportunity. And we moved into the accompanying suburbs. And I got enrolled in a Catholic school, and immediately I recognized that I was one of a few Latino and Black families in my school and in my area. And my parents, they both have thick Spanish accents. They can't hide who they are. They are who they are. But they thought that the more, quote, American I was, the more accepted I would be, the less discrimination I would feel. And so they encouraged me to assimilate. And that was, I think, a generational strategy, a personal strategy, right or wrong. They thought it was the best way for me to be successful. And
Well,
so
and
go ahead.
you know what's interesting about that, right? Like this is a very, what you're sharing, right? We hear this all the time with first gen.
Yeah.
And your parents knew it because they had experienced the bias and they
Yeah.
had experienced the racism and
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's,
Yeah.
and they didn't want that for you.
They didn't. And my mom was she's a, can I say badass? She's a badass.
You absolutely can on this program. That is,
yeah. She was, and she climbed herself up in a bank, a local bank, to manager. But she not only suffered racial discrimination, but gender discrimination in many ways. And so she did not want that for me. And so because my English became good, I had a lighter skin. She just, that was the advice. Like, why do you want racial discrimination? You already have gender bias, right? Why do you want all of it? So, that was the foundation of how I managed through school and getting into college and then the workplace. And, as I entered the workplace, I saw no one like me in corporate, and I think that matters. It makes a difference because when you're surrounded with people that are like you feel very comfortable being yourself. But when your lived experience is not seen, not only in the workspace around you, but in leadership, you're like, well, I think to be a leader, I must be X. And so
right. Here's what a leader looks like and acts like, and y'all, I want to give. I know Trisha said it, but think about this. This is the late 90s, early 2000s in Silicon Valley. We know what it's like even today. So she's walking into rooms, usually the only woman, and usually the only Latino. Right? So then the intersection of those things, she's a woman and she's a Latina in the early 2000s in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
1996, actually, when I started. I'm kind of old.
Okay, right? So right, mid 90s.
Yeah.
And so you chose covering.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Which is not right. Like that's survival.
It is survival. And I think what's hard about this journey, and I say it right up front in the book, is that when you cover for so long, there's shame that is attributed to that. Because, often people say to me, well, it worked. I have had a fabulous career. I started, the program with telling you what a phenomenal career I've had, right? And so there's shame in not standing proudly in your heritage, not being an advocate and using that privilege. And, so it required coming to terms with that. It also required, and as a result, covering also meant that I was in rooms where my ethnicity, my culture was not, stated in a good light, right? I heard derogatory comments, all kinds, right? So that just kept affirming for me that saying this is where I'm from would be dangerous. This would kick me out of the club. And so to walk in and proudly talk about where I'm from also created fear that I would lose all of the privilege and network and success that I had earned. And so there was a lot of fear for me to come forth, right or wrong. It was.
Well, right. And I think that there's starting to be some of the research of just the physical, emotional, psychological toll of
Yeah.
covering
Oh, yeah.
day after day, having to show up not as your authentic self.
Yeah.
That takes a toll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tremendous
So,
toll.
and all of this, I imagine, is what has led you to write the book.
Yes, it did. But I didn't know it. I, and I think that part of, because I started assimilating at such a young age, it almost became unconscious. Like I didn't
Mm.
even know I was doing this, right? For it at a really at a conscious level. But after really about 2 decades of just holding it all together, putting up all the armor, doing all the things, I came a point in time where my mental health declined, my physical health declined, all of the things were happening, and I didn't know why. And
Mm.
that's where I started sort of the journey of unpacking, like, why is this happening? I was so high achieving. I could do it all. The mom, the executive, the
Yeah.
sibling, the daughter, the wife. And then all of a sudden I couldn't do it all.
Mhm.
And I didn't know why. So that started the self-discovery and self-awareness of kind of the trauma that I had really endured in the workplace. Um, and so that healing took about 2 years. And then I found this phenomenal opportunity at Looker, as I mentioned, which had created such an incredible culture of belonging. When you see it, gosh, it's just an amazing
You
place.
just know, right? When you're
You
in
just
one of those
know.
cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just know. And because it had created such a psychological safety, it allowed me to grow even more. And so how the book got inspired, or I think the seed of telling my story got inspired, it was National Hispanic Heritage Month. We had
Mm.
created a program called a storyteller program, where we would have members of leadership and other employees tell their story at different parts of the year, different celebrations. And the Latinx ERG had asked if I would tell my story during this cultural celebration. And it was the first time anyone said, "Tell your story out loud in public."
Mm.
And again,
And
it
embrace
was
it.
and
Embrace
embrace
it.
it,
Right. Because
proudly.
to tell your story is to embrace your story.
It was, and it was the first time I was asked to do it, and it was scary. Well, it was like,
Yes.
okay. But I would say I had the privilege of being in leadership, so that definitely is helpful. And I had the support of the CEO, which mattered a lot. So I told my story at this event, in front of the whole company, and going into that moment, I was fearful of the reaction of just how people would treat me. I was scared they would treat me differently. And I did not expect the opposite. And the opposite was people were interested, excited, but more importantly, the women of color, and especially the Latinos in the organization, Latina and Latinos, uh, people came up in tears, Mo, like just saying things like, "I've never seen anyone in leadership that looks like me, that has the same story as me. Thank you. I now believe I can do it. Just seeing you and hearing your story." And in that moment, I realized that it took me back to 25 years earlier, where I saw no one that looked like me, and what a disservice that was for me, not being that person that I so desperately wanted to see as a
Mm.
young person. And so I literally came home that night and I told my husband, something transformative happened today. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but like it was so powerful in my body. Like I was just so
Like you knew,
moved.
right? Like you
I
knew
knew. Yeah.
that you had work to do. You had a mission.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like my purpose became clear. And So it took a couple of years, we had the whole Google acquisition. But
And by the way, I just want to connect some dots for people.
yeah,
Uh, Google acquired y'all for how much?
2.6 billion.
Okay,
Fourth largest acquisition Google's done.
okay. I want to connect that to the fact that Trisha said there was a culture of psychological safety and a culture of belonging.
Yeah.
Business results happen as a result, right? You were able
Yeah.
to show up and do your best work.
Yes.
So
Everybody could.
that's it.
Everybody
That's
could.
it. So that I just wanted to
Yes.
connect those dots
Thank you for
for
doing
those
that.
taking notes.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
okay, so the Looker acquisition happens.
And then hits COVID. We hit COVID. It's 2020. So we had a little extra time on our hands, and so I decided, so I decided to tell my story, and the book evolved through a phenomenal editor that helped me really develop the story and told my journey.
So when you think about your arc, right, of
Mhm.
coming to really embracing, what advice do you have for folks that may be in their organizations right now that are hiding parts of their identity?
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean,
know, by the way, y'all, Trisha goes into lots of detail in this in her book.
mhm.
And so if you would just share some of the high notes for us.
Yeah. So if somebody is covering or hiding their identity, I think we have to start with the context that there is a belief system that they've created that they're not enough, that their lived identity, their lived experience is not good enough in the workplace. And that could be consciously, unconsciously, but we've internalized that belief. So the first step is radical self-acceptance. It's the work that I did. It took 2 years, but it takes unlearning years, decades of messages that you're not enough, that you're not smart enough, that don't have enough credentials, that, all the things that we've learned through culture, media, the workplace, like family, even, so that you don't belong in the room. And I believe that to really feel like you belong in the room, it must begin with you believing you belong in the room. And we all know people, right? They'll walk into the room super confidently and own that who they are authentically, and it's because they believe that they belong there, right? And fake till you make it thing. I mean, it's a short-term strategy, but it's never going to create that freedom to really, I think, work at your best self.
And I think that radical self-acceptance, that's work.
It's work. It's not easy. And, being a type A high achiever, I remember when I first, I tell this story in my book. It's kind of funny, where someone who works with conscious, leadership and sort of some of this work, I was, like I mentioned, I was struggling with my mental health. I was, anxiety, depression, like all these things. And I was having dinner with her, and most people kept saying to me, don't worry, like it's going to be okay. Like all, and I was like, I know. And when I told her, like, I'm going through this, she just like lit up, put her hands in the air and was like, congratulations, this is amazing. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I literally feel like crap right now, and she's like, you are transforming, like you're doing the work, you're starting, like this is amazing. And I was like, okay, I'm really annoyed, but how long? So my second question was, how long does this take? Because I don't have time to feel like this.
I want to put it in my planner.
What's the checklist? This transformation thing. Well, how long does it take? And she says it takes like 2 years. And it's just like, what? And honestly, when I look back at that moment, it almost did take 2 years, because it takes just a lot of work of healing.
You know what I think is interesting. So I'm just thinking about this, just even as a woman, right? Having gone through that same thing, a white woman, right?
Yeah.
All the privilege, right? Cis, and the benefit on the other side, right? Of coming through that, of coming through the acceptance and just owning and being in your skin.
Yeah.
And I talk about the day that I finally got to the point where I didn't feel I had to show up like a middle-aged white guy to be successful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's exactly that. And I was trying to be a middle-aged white guy too.
yeah, right. Like right. And I already had the white thing
Yeah,
down.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, so how can managers support, right, create the environment where
yeah,
folks can show up fully, authentically as who they
yeah.
are, and even encourage that, right? If they have a young Trisha
Mhm.
working on their team.
Yeah, so I think both individuals and managers, I think the one of the key aspects is community, being in community.
Mm,
So if for the person that is hiding, I think finding your community, finding your people, whoever that is. But within an organization, that can be employee resource groups.
yeah,
That could be because there's something about being around people who have the same lived experience, no matter what that lived experience is, that just they just get it. You don't have to like explain it.
yeah.
you
You know
know
what? Actually, that was the founding of Moxie. So
oh, okay.
Moxie 14 years ago was a peer mentoring for women, right?
Yeah,
Professional women to get together so that
yeah,
we could talk about those things, and we could talk about perimenopause, and we could talk
yes,
and the impact on careers. We could talk about being asked to prove it again. We could talk about those
yes,
things. And so double down on that. Find your
mhm,
community, right? Find
yes,
your, whether that's gender identity in this case, right? Find your Latina community
hmm,
um, to support, right? Because you
yeah,
don't have to explain.
no,
Or
you
like,
don't.
oh my gosh, I
Yeah,
had
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and feel validated and affirmed, like this thing
Mm,
happened to me. Am I crazy? It's like, no, that happened to me too, right? The Me Too movement, me
that's
too.
legitimate, right?
It's legitimate. Yes.
Right. You're not, but you're being gaslit to think that it's not. Yeah.
Right, right. So psychological safety, as I mentioned, like Looker, one of the things that it had was psychological safety, and that requires intention. And
Hmm.
it was very interesting, watching the CEO at that company really evolve because he's a white man and he believed in DEI, believed in it, thought it was important, you know, but it wasn't until he realized that it has to be intentional. We
Yeah.
can't just believe in it. We have to make it part of our strategic plan. We have to
Yep.
have accountability. We were an analytics company, so we used data. We actually used data to measure how are we doing with diversifying our workforce? How are we doing? We're surveying to see the climate and the culture. And so it's just not gonna, like hope isn't a strategy, right? It has
Right.
to be very intentional from the top, right? It can't be delegated down 3 levels. And so when you get intentionality from leadership, authentically, that's not just, window dressing,
Yep.
all of those things matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm looking at time. So I want to make sure I get these right. So you're a member of the Latina Corporate Directors Association, LCDA, and
Yes.
sit on the Silicon Valley Exec Board for How Women Lead on the Latina Advisory Council.
Yes.
Um, we know that Latinas, I mean, when you look at, equal pay days,
Yeah.
Latinas are one of the last in the
Yeah.
year, right? To
Yep.
um, when you look at executive boards, when you look at executive suites, Latinas are missing.
Yeah.
What needs to happen? What needs to
Oh,
change?
gosh. Yeah, Latinas are the least represented in the boardroom, C-suite, venture capital, entrepreneurs. I mean, it is really hard to see. And what is hard to see about that is sitting in my seat is that the Latino market is the fastest growing market in
Look
this
at the
country.
demographics.
The demographic in the US population, we account for more than 20% of the population. The purchasing power, it's over $3 trillion. And if Latinos were a standalone economy, we'd rank fifth largest in the world.
Right? That's mind-boggling.
So it's
Fifth
mind
largest
boggling. Yeah,
GDP. if you
Yeah.
were, okay, yeah.
Yes. So I would say the first thing we need to do to make change is raise awareness on those statistics, right?
Mm,
Raise awareness of the massive economic opportunity, right? If companies recognize the massive economic opportunity for their businesses and start appreciating, that number one, there's talent out there that can bring you those ideas, those innovations, the things that will move and sell products into those communities. That would be incredible. So I think raising awareness is one of the things I'm trying to do, the LCDA is trying to do, and other organizations, I think people don't know, right,
yeah,
that this
yeah.
is such an
And
economic.
I think I I never love it that we have to start with the business case,
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
right? But there's like, if you just look at the numbers.
yeah. Look at the data, right? Look at the data. And I think two other things I would say. One, and this is the work that you're doing, is just continuing to have conversations around bias, systemic bias, unconscious bias. We have it in organizations. I think Latinas in particular, as you mentioned already, are at the intersectionality of gender bias and cultural bias. And so it's very difficult and tricky for Latinas in the workplace to succeed because they don't, they've got the bias already. They also don't have the mentors, right? Since we are less than 1% in leadership, we don't organically have the network or the mentors to understand how to navigate that situation. So, I always encourage our male allies and other allies, you look for that high potential person in your organization to mentor because and not only mentor but sponsor, right?
Sponsor. I was going to say sponsor.
Yeah,
And,
open
and as and
doors.
as you're thinking, yeah, as you're
Yeah,
thinking about that sponsorship, it's not sponsoring don't let your like me bias kick in, right?
yeah,
Sponsor somebody and don't go with the first person that you think of because your like me bias is going to be somebody that's just like you.
right,
So
right.
look at the results that people are
Mhm.
delivering, right? And look at the potential based on those results. And
Yeah.
you will find Latinas.
Oh my gosh, you will find them. And this is, one of the joys that I have is being able to be in both, communities. And when I'm in the Latina community, I mean, God, the incredible talent, work ethic, empathy, like the Latinas, I think because they've had to overcome so much, they just have such an incredible skill set. It is just hidden talent, really is. And so, yeah, I think just recognizing the opportunity in that hidden talent.
Wow. We packed a lot into this
Yes.
conversation. I'm going to put the link to your book in the chat. I'm wondering, and I know y'all, like, if you are looking for people to come in and talk in your organizations, to be that face, right? You have Trisha's in your organization.
Mhm.
So think about that. Is there anything coming up for you that you want folks to know about Trisha? Where you're going to be, any
Yeah.
conferences you're going to be at? Y'all connect with her on LinkedIn. But just would love, for people to, what you're doing is so important.
Thank you. Thank
Um,
you. Yeah, I love coming into organizations. So I am speaking at several organizations coming up with Women's History Month coming up, and speaking particularly love speaking at Latino organizations. I'm speaking in Texas, and in April or May, I'm going out to Connecticut to speak at the Latinas Empower organization, which I'll mention. Not only Latinas Empowers, but there are as many others, which are organizations that provide culturally relevant leadership programs for Latinas. And I think
yeah,
that's very important because, again, sort of being in a safe space where with a lived experience matters. And Latinas Empower has an organization called Latinas in Leadership Institute that does
great.
just that.
All right, leave me with one last truth bomb.
Oh,
Give me
truth
your mic
bomb.
drop.
I know. I'll start with how we started, which is let's let let's have more joy. And I think that in this world that we're living in right now, we're living in challenging times. We're more polarized than we've ever been. And I think there's a lot of distrust, right? People think there's one pie and,
Right.
somebody's taking one piece of it and that takes it away from me. And I would say, like, I think that there's enough for everyone. There's enough pie, and have grace on others and
Mm.
have grace on yourself. Because I think that we beat ourselves up a lot, and life's too short, honestly. So I think have grace.
Oh, I love that. Joy and grace.
Mhm.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Y'all watch for the links and make sure you're connected with Trisha, and let's all do our part. Because I think, right, as with everything around this work of inclusion, we all have a role to play. So thinking through what each of us can be doing to make sure that we are uplifting and amplifying, and particularly, we know Trisha shared the stat 1% of Latinas, right? So let's all do our part. And as I often say, let's all just get out there and do the next right thing. So we will see you next time on Everyday Inclusion Live. Trisha, thank you.
Thank you.